Hi all, hope you're staying safe and well. Today we're going to look at the second of the romantic poems from the Love and Relationships collection, and that is Neutral Tones. It's a very nice comparison to When We Two Parted, which I looked at in the previous video. Once again, we're going to look at the meaning, the imagery, the tone structure and the language of the poem. It would be ideal if you had a copy of the poem to be able to make notes on. I hope this is really useful. Okay, so we're just going to start with a reading of the poem. So, Neutral Tones by Thomas Hardy. We stood by a pond that winter's day, and the sun was white as though chidden of God, and a few leaves lay on the starving sod. They had fallen from an ash and were grey. Your eyes on me were as eyes that rove over tedious riddles of years ago, and some words played between us to and fro, on which lost the more by our love. The smile on your mouth was the deadest thing, alive enough to have strength to die, and a grin of bitterness swept thereby, like an ominous bird a wing. Since then, keen lessons that love deceives, and rings with wrong, have shaped to me your face, the God-cursed sun, and a tree, and a pond edged with greyish leaves. Okay, well, when looking at the meaning of the poem Neutral Tones, we first need to consider who the poet is. So, Thomas Hardy was famous for his naturalistic writing style. If you look at some of his novels, things like Tess of the D'Urbervilles, they follow a lot of similar themes and ideas to those that we see within Neutral Tones. He was known to have this sort of bleak and pessimistic outlook on life and relationships, and therefore this is reflected in the poem. The physical sort of descriptions that we have within the poem, we have in memory. We have a first-person recollection of a walk around a pond and a relationship that was coming to its conclusion, a relationship that had no life or energy left in it. So what we have is the poet remembering this time when he was walking around this pond on a winter's day, and how the metaphorical sort of coldness and decay in the world around him in winter is reminiscent of his own relationship, and how he feels that the relationship is going nowhere, it's coming to its conclusion and it's drawing to a close. As the poem comes to its conclusion, what we realise is that this is a memory that's been going round and round in the poet's mind for a long, long time. There is a sense of bitterness, there's a sense of regret, there's a sense of anger in this poem, and the fact that the relationship came to a conclusion and it stuck with Thomas Hardy for so long. It's implied that it is the poet's own point of view, because he uses the first person throughout. So what we have is this imagery of decay, this imagery of death, the poem itself representing that relationship that's coming to a conclusion and breaking down. The meaning of the poem, looking at that relationship with his partner and how he feels regretful and sorrowful for the relationship breaking down the way it did. Imagery-wise within Neutral Tones, there's lots of interesting things going on that Hardy's doing, particularly looking at this imagery of the winter's day and with death. So one of the most prominent is that the sun is white as though chidden of God. Now, chidden, obviously old-fashioned language, might be a bit more difficult to get our head around. Basically what that means is punished by God. So the world seems as if it's been punished. The world seems as if it's in suffering because of what is going on. It's been punished by a divine order, punished by God. And we've got to imagine this is a sort of bleak winter's day with the white sun. It's not this sort of vivid, colourful landscape. This is a cold and desolate place that we have. We have lots of imagery to do with death. We have, for example, leaves that had fallen from an ash and were grey. We have puns on the word ash, because obviously the ash tree, but also we have a sense of ash as things that have been burnt up, things that have been turned into dust, if you like. The greyness and the drabness of these decaying leaves, they're not like a vivid autumnal browns, reds and yellows. These are grey leaves that have turned to mush almost on the ground. So very, very vivid imagery that we have here. We also have imagery associated with death, for example, and the ominous bird a wing. The implication is that it's a raven or a crow, some sort of corvid bird that are generally associated with death and bringing misery in metaphorical terms. So we've got imagery there. We have descriptions, vivid descriptions of his partners. So we have the eyes on me were as eyes that rove over tedious riddles. So we can imagine his partner's eyes wandering, starting to look elsewhere because she feels this relationship is going nowhere. The fact that they are tedious riddles, these boring stories that have been sold years ago, that this relationship is going nowhere. So we have these vivid descriptions. The fact that he goes back to this memory, so it shapes to him the pond edged with greyish leaves and the tree. So it is a very vivid memory that is embedded into the poet's mind. It's something that's going to stay with him for a long, long time. We have the poet describing the leaves laying on the starving sod. So the fact that the earth is seen to be personified as starving is significant because it could indicate that it needs some nourishment, it needs some sort of growth. The fact that the relationship is coming to an end because it is being starved, that is particularly significant. One of the other nice uses of personification that we have here, the smile in your mouth was the deadest thing. The fact that we have it as the superlative deadest, it could not be any more dead, but it is alive enough to have strength to die. This very cynical and very bitter attitude that the poet has. We can imagine the smile being wiped from his partner's face, and again fully emphasising Hardy's bitterness, anger, regret and sorrow at the relationship and at this stage as it was coming to its conclusion. Okay, tonally the poem is quite interesting, quite difficult to get your head around on a nice sunny day like it is today. It's full of sorrow, it's full of misery, and it's full of regret. So what we have here is Hardy lingering on this relationship, if you like. This is something that's happened a long time ago for him in his perspective, but it still sticks with him as long and deep and emotional memories often do. So if we look at the poem, we have things like the starving sod, we have the eyes that rove, riddles, the words playing between them. It's as if they were almost like at a game in the stage of their relationship. They weren't in love anymore, it was just going through the motions, if you like. There's the semantic field to do with death, such as the deadest thing, strength to die, ominous, these sort of words associated with death and misery, and the imagery that we talked about previously going alongside and supporting that. We also have interesting things about how Hardy's attitude to love. So the fact that we have the personification that love deceives is quite interesting, because that's oxymoronic. It shouldn't really make sense. Love is meant to be this selfless and emotional and passionate thing, and he's saying that it's a deceptive emotion. It's something that cheats you, which could be linking to this idea of bitterness and the rings with wrong. The fact that he feels that he's cursed is significant as well. So a nice cheery poem in the sense that the tone is quite bitter and angry and miserable, and filled with that sorrow and regret at the end of this relationship. There are a few interesting things that we can pick up with the structure of the poem and the way that Hardy's constructed it and pieced this poem together. So what we have is the fact that it's a first-person narrative is significant, and the fact that it's a very personal perspective. It's Hardy's point of view, and it is a direct address to his partner. The fact that he talks about your eyes on me were as eyes that rove. This is a direct address. It's meant to be a personal reflection, talking to his partner. We could talk about how the poem seems cyclical. It starts and ends in the same place. If we imagine the couple walking around the lake or walking around the pond, they start and end in the same place. It's a circular pond, and it starts and ends in the same way. We stood by a pond that winter's day, and ends with a pond edged in greyish leaves. Cyclical narrative, and this could reflect Hardy's point of view that the relationship is going round and round his head and never actually leaves. We could talk about how the poem shifts its focus. It talks about the natural world and then zooms in to focus on his partner and her attitude, and then goes back to the natural world. So we've got this shift in focus throughout the poem and how it shifts beyond that. The fact that it has the perfect AB rhyme structure could indicate that Hardy's had long time to think about and reflect about this relationship, and that's reflected in the fact that he's had time to structure this perfect rhyme scheme. And although it's an imperfect thought in the sense that it's a very dark and miserable thought, it's a thought that he has had a long time to construct and to piece together. Okay, so as previously mentioned in the tone and in the imagery sections of this video, what the main use of language is in the poem is the use of sorrow and death and misery, and particularly decay is quite an interesting thing to have a look at. So semantic fields around that, there's lots of different words that we could use to associate with that. For example, if we look in stanza 1, we have things like the fact that it's a winter's day, it is white, the fallen from an ash, they were grey, all that sort of vocabulary in there associated with the coldness and the decay of winter. We could talk about the fact that the sun is punished by God, the fact that we've got this imagery associated with the divine being flipped on its head and juxtaposed with punishment, which is quite an interesting idea. We could talk about the language of of how he describes his partner, and look at the fact her eyes are roving, her eyes are wandering, which is quite significant. We've got the idea that the fact that they are riddles, and these are tedious riddles, boring riddles that have been solved years ago. The fact that the words are playing between them, to and fro, back and forth, is quite important. The fact that there's no sort of depth to their conversations anymore. It seems to be as if they are almost just playing at being in a relationship rather than really being in one. Interesting imagery using the superlative deadest, when we have the smile on the mouth was the deadest thing alive enough to have strength to die, and obviously throughout that we have the juxtaposition of alive and die. The fact that we have this last lingering gasping breath, almost, if you like, of their relationship, this tiny little flicker of a smile is now just enough strength to die, is quite important. And we can think about that, how it signifies and links back to the starving sod from the earth, the greyness, the decay that's going on all around them. We have the fact at the end, the personification of love, the fact that it is deceptive, and the fact that it is something that can cheat and deceive you and can linger in your mind for a long time. The curse of God is again quite significant. The pond edged with greyish leaves, an ominous bird of wing, all this imagery associated with death and misery and decay. So I quite like neutral tones to analyse because there's a lot you can get from it. There's a lot where you can use small little micro quotes and you can embed them quite easily. The words of grey and starving and cursed, there's a lot that you can explore from within that. If we link it back to Hardy's tone, his attitude, his feelings about love, and particularly about this relationship, which is sustained and stayed with him despite it being ending a long time ago. Okay, as I said yesterday in the video for When We Two Parted, it does compare quite nicely to neutral tones, and that's why I've done these two first. So for today's activity, there is an essay question to consider, or an idea to think about, a plan which just considers neutral tones, but also there's a comparison question which, if it was me, I would be guided towards When We Two Parted. I think these two poems compare really nicely, and they cover a lot of similar themes and similar ideas. The idea of sorrow and rejection is quite prominent within both of them. So if you'd like to have a look at them, please don't hesitate to send me anything, any work that you've been doing, and send it my way. And if you stay tuned at the end, we've got today's film recommendation. For today's film recommendation, I'm going to go for one of my favourite tense films that are filled with absolute drama and moments of audacity that you can't even believe it's real, and that's Argo. It tells a story of a plot to get American and Canadian citizens out of Iran at a time when the country was descending into chaos, and by pretending to be filming a sci-fi film and using them as the film crew. It's fantastically tense. Some of the airport scenes are absolutely magnificent. I would heartily recommend going to seek it out. It's absolutely amazing. Next lesson, we're going to be focusing on another of the love and relationships poems. Until then, take care.